whenever you look at an innovation, you'll find out that it probably has these 4 things. I haven't seen an innovation yet that doesn't have those 4 things. There probably is one out there, because there kind of needs to be an exception to the rule. Now, in the business world, first is still about being new and creative, but useful has to do with customers and successful has to do with a business outcome. And what's kind of interesting is, if you don't have all these things, then you don't end up with an innovation, which is this sweet spot in the middle. So we took Pilsak's definition, this first, useful and successful, and we actually turned these quantities into a thing that you could score out of 10. And we're going to do a couple of examples with this in a minute so that you can see how to score them. So this is an innovation developed by GE, and it's actually a very cool thing. This is an MRI machine that you have in hospitals. And I don't know if you've ever experienced having an MRI, but they're very, very loud, noisy machines, and it's quite claustrophobic when your head is in this hole here and you've got to deal with this. For a child, it's pretty frightening. So what was really interesting that GE did is that they realized, well, what about if we make, if we hand over with our MRI, which costs $2.5 million, some really cool stickers that turn the whole experience into something like a pirate chip experience, right? So this idea that there's this kind of hierarchy between art and invention and innovation is interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about the 2 ways that you might actually come up with the solution to the problem, okay? And one way is to redirect your attention, where you use a kind of cognitive psychological approach, and this is the way that we like, okay? And the other side is kind of a human-centered design approach, which is based around empathy. The one on the left, the cognitive psychology approach, that's a bit more sciencey or managing, and the one on the right, that's a bit more artistic. You can think about these other factors too when it comes to risk, when it comes to not only how much you're paying, but how that price is presented. When it comes to the situation that you're in, that often changes what's happening. If you've ever spent some time coaching a team of small children, and I have 2 sons, so at one point I coached their football team, on Saturday after the game, occasionally what you'll do is you'll take them all out for ice cream. And because that fit exactly with something to do while you're having a cup of coffee, it fit perfectly with Starbucks. And they totally owned the market. That's how they got 1 million sales. We can graph this for you so you can kind of have a look at it. On this graph here, what you'll see is you can see here what the traditional game is the kind of black bars. What the customer actually wants is the red bars, and the blue bars are what Cranium offers. Okay, and this idea of being able to try before you buy and play just for fun, it totally changed the market for Cranium and made them really successful.
So there's one thing that we always like to mention here is that most companies by default in how corporate best practice has worked potentially over the last 50 years is we were always trying and striving to create efficient companies. Lean Six Sigma, risk management, standardizations, these were all topics that dominate our day-to-day business conversations internally. So of course, business practices and people management and leadership rally around these concepts in a more traditional sense. So what's really interesting to look at then is not what makes companies more innovative, it's what makes companies more adaptive and perhaps move away a little bit from that efficiency mindset that we used to carry in business so strongly.
One of the things we need to do when we're trying to help an organization develop innovation muscle is we've got to help them to come up with innovations as a matter of course, or come up with experimentation as a matter of course. And there's 2 things involved in that. There's the process and the practices of innovation. And so this is where you get the ideas of design thinking and design sprint and lean thinking come in. But then probably the most important part of it is actually the behaviors. And so agile movement has got a lot of human-centered behaviors, humanistic behaviors to bring the best out of people. So it's about taking a back step in leadership, becoming more servant leadership, more adaptive leadership, where you're actually trying to encourage the collective consciousness of your team, the collective intelligence of the team to come up with ideas. So what you're actually doing is you're not too sure which innovation is going to be successful in the future in an emerging market. So what you do is you run multiple small ones. And by doing that, you're actually reducing the probability of one failure. You're creating a portfolio of experiments And you know some may fail and some may do well. But that's the classic way an adaptive organisation reduces risk, by spreading its innovation efforts across multiple parallel experimentations.
The most important thing that they do is quite amazing in large companies, is that they protect their team against the scrutiny that comes from the outside of the organisation. In other words, they take the heat for performance, and it's above them, so there is this accountability requirement. You know, what have you done for us lately? How's it going? What's the progress? But below them, the team that work with them, that they respond to, they do this thing John talked about before. They become servant leaders, and what they do is that they create the environment where people are trusted with the resources that they need, and in fact the slack that they need to succeed in the way that makes sense to them. So they do provide a direction, but they're much more serious about deflecting the over accountability from above. And
let's look at what kind of the research or best practice says about innovation or adaptive leaders. And for sure, what Rob was saying, being a challenger, you know, taking the stress away from your team and maybe challenge the status quo in the company a bit more to remove roadblocks and make things easy for the team. They have high levels of empathy. They're resilient, so that resonates with what Amal was saying, and creativity, or able to work design thinking tools, for example.
Okay, I'll try. Well, we talked about the 4 things that innovations have in common, that they break rules, and that they use what's unique about the circumstances that you're in to kind of do what the normal solution would be. But they do that in a way that's only obvious after you've seen it happen. And so all innovations have that thing. The difference is that some innovations are only incremental, and some of them are evolutionary, and some of them are transformational. So we shared a scoring table where you get, you kind of score those 3 things out of 10 and multiply them together and get a number out of 1,000. And then under 150, you'd say, well, this is probably incremental. And over 600, you'd say it's transformational. But it's the in between those 2 zones, the evolutionary development, that's the sweet spot that companies like. And we figured that there's 2 kinds of ways that you can do innovation, at least the front part of the design of it anyway. You can take a kind of empathy-based, human-centered design approach that's a bit more like art, and you could take a more kind of science-based approach that's a bit easier to manage, that's based on cognitive psychology. Either way, what John was saying about having a number of projects that you take forward on a small scale and then see which ones of them succeed over time is the correct way to do that. And you should do that with a form of market testing, so that you're actually getting real feedback to make that work. Then we just introduced the kind of thing about this cognitive psychology thing. We introduced the terms design tool, which was time, emotion, risk, money, and situation, thinking about what a customer wants. And then after that, Miriam, you kind of scaled it up with John to the idea about how you can actually start implementing some of that at the kind of company level in your organizations.